Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing a 25.17 top plane tier list. So if you enjoy content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are a couple of changes this patch, most notably towards two of the pro skewed top lane champions, being Gwen and Rumble. Akin to Rumble, we also saw adjustments towards Singed in the previous patch, fixing his blue side tick rate on the poison. This is what they were doing with Rumble with the flamethrower tick rate, and that ended up being pretty heavily positive for both these champions, so they've ended up nerfing them in the following patch. We also saw some build adjustments, well, I said build adjustments, alternative builds kind of being promoted again as a follow-up patch to the 25.16 one. We saw AP Aurelia receive some buffs. We also saw Lane Kane receive a bit of a buff, having his mana costs go down. Other things which kind of popped up are things like Xin Zhao. Obviously he had his ASU this patch, which ended up garnering him some play rate in top lane. He doesn't perform that well. I wouldn't really recommend him. And then Lee Sin, I believe there have just been some videos and kind of builds floating around of Lee Sin, which have also kind of promoted him as a top lane pick. He also doesn't perform that well, but he also has a higher barrier to entry than a lot of other top laners. So let's get into it. So the D tier is going to consist of a couple of champions now, with the likes of Xin Zhao and Lee Sin, who I've just briefly touched on. In the case of Xin Zhao, he can function if you give him a bit of an advantage. He definitely has the ability to duel a lot of the top laners, but if you ever fall behind or you're ever in just a less a suboptimal position, he really struggles. He doesn't have the tools to kind of sit back and just farm. If you are behind the curve, you're a stat sticker, and if you're in that situation, you end up just not really being that impactful to the game. He does have a strong ultimate and he does have flex potential. Those are two ways you could argue that he kind of can claw some back. He can also he's also not that hard to pilot. You can pilot him with relative ease, and that can lack of barrier to entry can also benefit him here. So he could honestly be bumped up to the C tier, but I don't really recommend him, and I imagine his pick rate will pretty much die back down going into next patch. Lee Sin, I also believe this is probably to an extent a bit of a spike. He will also most likely see a decay in his pick rate, but Lee Sin at top has always seen some level of play rate with the Ravenous Hydra variations, and obviously all the way back when Gordrinker existed, that's when Lee Sin top was a legitimate pick. Right now, I don't think it's that great of an option. Lee Sin as a champion got buffed more recently and then got nerfed because the buff ended up being quite sizable, especially for jungle, and it didn't really achieve what Riot were wanting to achieve with it, trying to push him into competitive. I believe he only saw 2 games at MSI and then kind of not really much else past that. The pick in top, yeah, just not a champion I really recommend. The other picks, which are, well, the other two which I'm dropping down are Viego and Gwen. So Viego, this might not surprise many people. The pick obviously received a decent chunk of lane buffs for 25.16, trying to give him some more sustain and some alternative builds to work with. It hasn't performed that well in top lane. I temporarily put it in C tier, as people kind of experimented with the builds, see what worked, the Trinity into Sintered Sky, or the Kraken Slayer variations, or the Bork variations, but He just seems a bit on the weaker side, and it's not like old Viego where you could have just the innate sustain through through Divine Syndra. That's when Viego back in the past was really successful because he had so much just on-demand sustain through that item, and it gave him durability, gave him damage. It just gave him a lot of tools which he wants. And right now you end up sacrificing either damage or your durability or your sustain through some of his builds, and that just ends up not being that amazing of a pick. Gwen might surprise people. I'm dropping all the way down to the D tier. She received a pretty hefty nerf this patch, and honestly, the Gwen kind of chain of patches and kind of what's been going on with champion is a complete failure on Riot's behalf. They should just revert the champion at this point. It would surprise me if in patches to come the play rate really declines quite aggressively. The fact that the way this champion kind of ended up being shaped, giving her some level of agency in early game, through the E, C, D, and through the ultimate slow, and now stripping away obviously that ultimate slow, has meant that the champion might begin to fade away from competitive. Obviously she was number 1, 2 in top lane with Rumble, but this nerf will be meaningful. It's utility down, it's gonna be damage through not being able to consistently land your Qs or R as much. And overall, I just think this champion's fallen in a really bad spot. She probably is a C-tier option. Like, I think if you're comfortable with a champion, you can still get good results out of her. And honestly, I imagine, like, going into kind of, like, high elo competitive, she probably, like, goes all the way back up to, like, B, maybe even A tier. But for, like, average play, I really just recommend avoiding this champion. I might bump her up to C tier next patch, depending on, like, how the rest of the patch shapes up. But, yeah, I would just recommend avoiding her for the moment. The other picks which remain in the D tier are your Maokai's, who just a low agency tank, which isn't really that supportive in the top lane at the moment. I just don't really recommend him. Smolder, also just like a conditional counter pick. I think you can make him work against Cassandra, but even then, it's like you're probably better off playing something else, unless you've like got a lot of expertise on the champion and it's something you're already comfortable with, because he will be damaging to your team composition in most situations. So I'd kind of just recommend avoiding him. And then Udyr, even, I mean, like both the AP, like AP tank, AP bruiser, and the AD variation, neither of them perform particularly well in the top lane at the moment. So I just don't really recommend him. I think if you're an OTP, there's some level of curve to him where you can kind of claw some of that back, but he's definitely in one of his weaker states at the moment. Moving on to the C tier then, we lead off with Kayn. The Kayn buffs were nice. It means he doesn't need to opt into something like presence as consistently. I think the barrier to entry of Kayn though really comes from his like proxying and how you like utilize the proxy, whether that's like just queuing over Baron Wall and then queuing over Krog Pit, or the opposite way around where you're like queuing over Baron into like going through blue side. It can vary depending obviously on which side of the map you're on. Usually what it equates to is like 14 seconds of downtime on your queue. You then queue the wave twice, I believe it is, so you can kill the back lines and then kill the front lines. You might need to auto the front lines once each. That's if like they don't walk with the wave. If they walk with the wave, then you're forced to kind of standard lane for level 1. There's just intricacies to it, before I like really digress into like the lane dynamics of this champion. And I think if you learn it well, then he probably even maybe jumps to the B tier. Like, I don't think the pick's bad in his current state, and like the mana cost decrease more than anything allows you to standard lane a bit better. You can fight level 1. Like, Kayn's level 1 isn't bad. Like, your Q does pretty chunky amount of damage. You can just innately push the wave as well with it. So I think there are spots where it can definitely work, which is why I have him in the C tier at the moment. And honestly, maybe like he could be a high C tier option, but he does have depth, and you do need to learn like what lanes you want to proxy in, what lanes you kind of want to stand lane into proxy, what lanes you can just get away with standard laning in, and just like trading with the opponent. I would recommend primarily Red Kayn. There are different build variations I've seen floating around, whether that's like your Eclipses, your like lethality variations, your cleaver variations. I think it really comes down to what you feel comfortable with and what like really works for your playstyle of the build. Cassandra low 8 is not that high agency for like mid elo. Like, I don't really recommend this champion. He's got a pretty high barrier to entry, and he's early game skewed in like the where games traditionally go longer. It's not a pick I really recommend that much. Yone's just been in a weak spot for a while. I have him towards the low end of the C tier. I just don't really recommend him. Jace is a hard to pilot champion. I think Jace and Gangplank I just have next to each other. Is like they have really high like master curves where if you've put a lot of time into them, they can compete easily with like some of the top champions in the top lane, but you need to have basically been an OTP of these picks. If you're not an OTP, I just recommend completely avoiding them. They are kind of like traps to fall into. Tahm Kench has just been on the weaker side for a while now, ever since the kind of Tahm Kench like Jinx incident. I believe it was Reptile who posted on Twitter, and they just gutted him, and he's been in a pretty meh spot for a while now, so I just don't really recommend Tahm Kench. He can be frustrating to play against though. Try not to like get frustration mixed up with power. Like I do think if you just kind of ride the wave of your champion's power curve and just like get to like team fights, you will be more valuable than him. But he does have things he can kind of do in lane to kind of like cheese you out, pull you under tower, or just like look for all in angles, which can like sometimes be hard to avoid. Trundle, I'm leaving him the C tier. He's actually a low C tier option now. The nerf was meaningful. I believe it was 20% attack speed on the W combined with some CD on the W. He wasn't a performance top laner in the previous patch, but the nerfs in 25.16 were meaningful, and he definitely like probably drops to like here. I don't really recommend him that much anymore. But if you're comfortable on him, I think there's some spots where he can work. So he probably falls in like the Tom Kench boat of champions, honestly. No, I have him towards the high end of the seat. I feel like he's really, really close to being like a viable champion. But he's got a barrier to entry, obviously. You need to understand how to like use both forms of a champion. You need to kind of like understand how you want to bully people out of lane. I think utilizing him as a counter pick more than anything can be quite good. Like I think counter pick now is a genuine champion. I think there are matchups where if you blind him and you're not that comfortable with a pick, he can definitely be quite hard. So I think that kind of like dissuades me from like moving him much higher up in the tier list. I think in Elite he probably sits as like a B tier option. When I say he's quite close to being like a good champion, I think in Elite, I think in average play he's always going to be this kind of below the bar champion. Like right, if he's above the bar, then he's probably just broken for competitive. And right now, yeah, I'd say he kind of sits at the top of the C tier. Like there are spots where I genuinely think can be quite good. So yeah, I'm here. Moving on to the B tier then, we're going to lead off with Swain, who I've bumped up. I think Swain in the right spots, genuinely quite good. Like, he has lane bullying capabilities with the kind of like airy Scorch setup, where you're just like blasting people from level 1 with Q. I think he is genuine threat in that regard, so I wouldn't sleep on Swain in that, in those spaces. If you can't bully out the opposing laner, and they have the tools to kind of overwhelm you, or just like not really care about what kind of like harassment you're laying down, whether that's through like the EW combo or through the just like perma Q spams, he can struggle. I think there are spots where Swain's quite a bad champion in top lane, but I think there's spots where he can be quite a good top laner. So I'm gonna leave him at the bottom of the B tier. This is more of just like I think there are genuine spots where I'd actually recommend playing Swain. Silas, I think, as a counter pick can be quite a good option. I have him in the B tier. He's obviously like a 4-way flex pick at the moment, and that does give him increased value. You don't know where the champion's going to go. Obviously, when you're playing him top, you're mostly just going to see him as a counter pick to like Narmal fight. But I still think outside of those matchups, there are spots where he can genuinely feel quite functional. And as long as there are a couple good ultimates in the game, I would honestly recommend trying him out and just seeing whether you're comfortable with the pick. Tryndamere, I have him in the B tier. I really don't like recommending Tryndamere at the moment. I think his play pattern's really degenerate, but if you're an OTP, then you'll continue to play him. And I think that he's fine as an option. Like, you can make him work. He does have some pretty hard matchups in the top lane, and that can deny him from either sieging or really, like, quite aggressively trading early on to the game, which can definitely limit the power of the pick. That being said, though, just like the Ravenous like grass play pattern or Ravenous fleet play pattern with like Q, D shield, second wind, it makes him very hard to move out of lane, and it just creates this really kind of not very healthy gameplay pattern, which I kind of don't really recommend, because I'm hoping at some point they kind of push him away from that, but right now that is kind of what he is. So if you enjoy that play pattern, then yeah, he can be a good option for you. If you don't, then you don't need to play him. Like, he's not that amazing at the moment. Yeah, so I think as a counter pick can be a genuine option, but you need the right comp around him. If you pick a bad comp, like if you pick him in a bad comp, he can be punished by that, and I think that kind of prohibits him from being much higher up in the list. If you're looking for some ADCs in the top lane, I think Vayne and Varus can be quite good options. Varus honestly probably is sinking closer to the C tier. The nerfs he received to his lethality build did not look to the buffs he received for his on-hit build do not look to have outweighed quite heavily the lethality nerfs, so he's ended up being, honestly, maybe even like slightly power neutral, so he sits towards the low end of the B tier. I recommend Vayne over him at the moment, and if you can get good counterpick scenarios where you're not like destroying the composition with these picks, I think they can be genuine options, so I do have them in the B tier at the moment. Camille's been mediocre for a while. I think using her as a counter pick can get you success, but if you just blind the champion, she does have hard matchups at the moment, and some of those hard matchups are quite popular. Things like your Argots, your Renekton's, your Jaxes, she can struggle into, and they're all quite good champions at the moment. Even things like your Sets, your Mordekaisers can be finicky. Like, they can just stat check you, and if you fall behind and you're not comfortable with the matchup, they can be quite hard for you to pilot. So I don't recommend the champion that highly, but if you're comfortable playing Camille, you know the counterpick spots, I think she considers a B tier option at the moment. And Bessa, I have her in the B tier. It's mostly the fact that she's just not that performant for a mid-elo pick. She's, I would argue, one of the best champions to have within your arsenal in the game, like as a top laner. Like her and Jax, I would say, are very, very high up there. She's been pretty much left alone since like the end of last year for her balance state, which I would honestly say is a pretty heavy merit for like the balance of the champion for like average play. I do think she's above the curve for elite. Like almost everyone in elite has Ambessa within their champion pool, which is probably not a good thing. Like she is pretty agnostic with how she functions, so it depends on how you see it. Like if you want to play Ambessa, I would recommend it. I would recommend learning the champion, but she does have a barrier to entry, and you can definitely struggle against like your Renekton's and some of the other matchups which can just overwhelm you, like your Sets and your Mordekaisers can be hard to pilot. But if you are comfortable on the pick, they can become alright matchups. They can definitely they can definitely not be quite as painful as like when you like start off with learning the champion, and that's just, I think, is just below the bar. I think he needs a slight buff, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just don't give it to him. He can be a frustrating champion. I think if you use him as a counter pick though in the right spots, he can be a genuine option. Ornn, I think, could also do with a slight buff. I think his mana costs are just a bit too high at the moment, and you want to opt in, like, most Ornn players want to opt into like Magical Filter Biscuits, but are forced to opt into like Mana Flow Scorch so they can actively kind of like play lane, which is, I don't know if that's got like the correct spot for the champion to be in, where he has to opt into Mana Flow. I think also as an extension of this, I think Fimbulwinter just needs to be buffed. Like the item is just underpowered at the moment, and that would probably help Ornn if he ends up like opting into the item. But yeah, I would say he's just a bit below the bar. Like I would recommend Scion, Cho'Gath, Mundo, Shen as like tank options over him. I think there's just a plethora of picks which I would recommend over Ornn at the moment. Garen's been in this like alright spot for, I say alright, mediocre spot for a while now. Like a lot of Garen mains don't like the current state of the champion, which makes sense. He's lost a genuine amount of damage and kind of like traded some of that for durability, albeit he's still going the same build, so it can feel quite punishing to play the champion compared to where he used to be. I have him in the beta at the moment. He could probably do with a buff, and yeah, I would say he's just like in a mediocre spot at the moment. Gragas, I think if you're comfortable with, can be quite a good option. I don't recommend him extraordinarily highly because I do think he's got quite the barrier to entry. Understanding how to utilize your displacement effectively, what builds you want to go, just how you want to pilot a champion, I would say does require a decent amount of mastery of a champion, which is why I only have him in the beta at the moment. But if you get comfortable with the pick, he can definitely compete with like the A and the S tier options. Riven lost a genuine amount of power a couple of patches ago, and I see, like, to an extent recovered some of that. Obviously, like, there was the bug, which is why the win rate for a while was quite egregious. But since then, I'd say she just sits as a beta option. The power, like, loss which she received was meaningful. And, the case with Riven, it's like, it's the same for Katarina, where if you're comfortable playing the champion, you'll continue to play the champion and get success on the champion. If you don't play the champion, I basically recommend completely avoiding it. It's like, Rivens, your Aurelias, your Katarinas, they're OTP champions, and they really do. The performance matters so much on these picks, but they go from like D tier to like S tier champions depending on your mastery of the pick. So I don't really recommend Riven at the moment because I do think she's in one of her weaker states. But if you're on OTP, you'll continue to play her. Darius remains as a beta option, I think, in the right situations and like where you get him as like a counter pick and you can snowball your advantages. He can be quite an effective option. But Darius for a while now has been quite elite skewed, and I wonder if they'll ever end up shifting that to kind of like make him better for average play, albeit like he can be quite a frustration problem in this bracket. I'd be interested to see, but right now, I'd say he's slightly under the par for average play, but he can be a good champion to sink some time into. Like just learning him can be quite an effective way to climb. Volibear, I think. He's not similar to Darius. He's a very snowball reliant champion. You want to get the good matchups. You want to just like steamroll lane, stay ahead of the curve, and it will feel incredibly overbearing for the enemy to play against. If you fall behind though, you will struggle. Like this champion from behind doesn't like stat check people as consistently. And that does leave him with like clear vulnerabilities. But it's about finding the right matchups, getting comfortable with the pick, and then just steamrolling the opponent. Aurora, I have in the beta, she's just a bit elite skewed. That's kind of where she lies as a champion at the moment. I think in elite brackets of play, she's like an A, maybe even an S tier option. For average play, she sits as like a B tier pick. I think if you get comfortable with the champion, she can be a good option to learn, can be a good counter pick, so that some of the like high elo pro meta champions, and that can give her like a decent merit. So I do run the B tier, high end of the B tier at the moment. Rise, I think, is a good AP option to have within your pool, and honestly, I think you could put Cassiopeia. Actually, I have Cassiopeia in the A tier, but I honestly think Cassiopeia could maybe be dropped down to the B tier. I don't really recommend her as much at the moment. Cassiopeia's definitely been struggling ever since those changes like a while ago. Like, she's definitely not the same champion, and then they like kind of nerfed her a bit. So some of these picks have definitely like dropped down slightly, which is why I would honestly put her like towards the high end of the B tier at the moment. But you could still argue any of these champions can be in the A tier as long as you master them. I mean, that kind of goes for a lot of the top lane. Like, I actually think the game's relatively balanced in the fact that the gap between a lot of the S tier and D tier can just be made up for mastery. There are some like genuinely weaker options which I do think are under the bar at the moment, but like for the general like pool, as long as you've put the time into a champion, you can compete with a lot of the top tier options. So it's about finding what you're really comfortable with and what champions you want to put the time into because you enjoy them more than anything. Malphite, I've in the B tier. He's a good counter pick and he's easy to play, but he's low agency, and that's always going to be the biggest markdown on Malphite. Like, this champion needs to be good to be an A S tier option, in my opinion. If he's not, if he's not really above the bar, then he just ends up being a fine counter pick option. But like, when you're playing a tank as a fine counter pick option, it feels kind of bad. Like, you want to have more agency in the game. That is like a really meaningful thing to have at the moment. Honestly, I'm bumping Alawi and Kled up to the A tier. Alawi's buff last patch were meaningful, and the damage increase she got was, like a sizable chunk for the pick. She is incredibly mid to low elo skewed at the moment. Elite Alawi looks really, really bad, so I think you could argue maybe she should be B tier for that. Like, her ability to convert into high elo is at an all-time low, and Alawi was already a very, very innately mid to low elo skewed champion. So I think Riot need to kind of like look at how they want to kind of approach the champion. And then Kled, the pick's lost damage, and that is noticeable, but he's really tanky, and having the ability to kind of like dive into a fight and then live for a long time, dismount, remount. I mean, that's obviously like the meme with all the Kled mains at the moment, like just how consistently you can kind of just remount on this champion and continue to just have a health bar. And through that, you can honestly like get back to kind of some of the damage you were doing in the previous iterations. It's just more about your extended fight patterns and how you play them out. So I'm going to bump him up to the A tier. So I think there are genuine spots where he can be quite good. But you do just have to be aware that he's not the same champion. He is less about the upfront damage, more about the extended patterns and just like making sure you can remount within fights. Moving on, dropping down from the A to the B tier is Rumble. The nerf was pretty sizable this patch. I mean, makes sense. They gave him a loss of power in the previous patch through fixing the bugs on red side Rumble. And now that they've done that, Rumble lost some, like, had to be nerfed. He's lost some genuine power. I believe it's 0 to 20 on the flamethrower, and then 1% damage on the passive. So, a decent chunk of upfront damage to lose there. Gonna be dropping him down to the B tier. The A tier then. So we're going to lead off with... Oh my god, there's a huge plethora of champions here. I'm going to actually bump Wukong up. Do I? I'll have him at the top of the B tier. Wukong, I think, can be genuinely quite a good top lane option, especially used as a counter pick. That being said, though, if you don't use him as a counter pick and you have the master into him, he's not like a champion you can just first time and kind of get away with it. You need to know the spots and kind of understand how you want to pilot the pick. So I think for that, I'd actually probably have him towards the high end of the B tier. But I wouldn't. This is more of a don't sleep on Wukong. I think he can be a genuine option in the right spots. Okay, the A tier then. So Quinn, I did have at the low end of the A tier, but the buff towards Profane Hydra this patch is really, really meaningful for the champion. So I'm going to probably move her to the top of the A tier. Like, she's kind of like back as like an option. And if you want to sink time into Quinn, I'd recommend like giving her a go at the moment. Zach, I have in the A tier. He's like he's the niche tank of the A tier. I think in the right spots you can definitely make him work, but he's pretty OTP driven at the moment, and if you're not an OTP, I just recommend taking some of the more mainstream tank options, your Sans, your Shens, your Cho'Gaths once again, like as like pretty good all-round, maybe not all-rounders, but like pretty good generic options. Talking about So Aurelia got AP buffs this patch. Don't play OP Aurelia. It's bad. I believe there just isn't a particularly good like build path to go. Like Nasha Aurelia just isn't that great of an option. That being said though, she's better with Baron now. So 25-minute mark if you're getting your Baron. Nice, that's some power through this champion. The other like way you can look at, I say the other way you can look at it. The other buff she received was like a 2-second cooldown decrease on E. I believe it goes from 16 to 12 to 16 to 10. It's nice. It doesn't really do anything though. Like Aurelia is still the champion, which I basically recommend completely avoiding unless you've got a ton of mastery on the champion, because she is so egregiously early game skewed and snowball reliant that it's like the barrier to entry is just so high on the champion at the moment. So I have her in the A tier because I think if you're comfortable on the pick, she's incredible as an option. But I think if you're not, then just avoid her. Like, don't play Aurelia. That would kind of be the tip I have for her at the moment. Some of your other AP options, some of your AP options within the A tier include the likes of Akali, who I think as a counter pick can be a really good option. I really like her as a pick. I think she's just a good AP assassin to have within your pool. High Midinger is a bit more niche, but I still think he can be an incredibly powerful like early to mid game option, and even late. Like his burst can be really really high, and like the harass he can lay down can be really meaningful. Kennen is just a slept on champion. I think people have for the longest amount of time been sleeping on the pick. He scales well, he has good lane bullying capabilities, his team fighting with his ultimate can be really powerful. I'd say he's got a barrier to entry. CSing on this champion can be a pain in the ass sometimes. Like, it can be really, really annoying because his auto, I believe it's a projectile speed on his auto attacks is just sluggish. Like, it can be quite frustrating to kind of work with that. And then, like, probably my most recommendable AP option for, like, raw, I don't know. Okay, that wouldn't be true, actually. I think two of the other AP options are Teemo and Vladimir. Vladimir I really like as a pick, so I am going to rate him slightly higher than Teemo. But I think Teemo, if you've sunk a lot of time to him, can be a really good option. So I think there is just like a variety of AP A-tier options. I'll talk about them when I get to the S tier a bit more in depth, but the two top AP options are Kale and Singed. Singed still really good, even with the nerf he received this patch, but he is a niche option, and you have to understand how you kind of want to play lane out of a champion. I think Kale is just my number one for this elo bracket. She rarely gets punished enough to kind of deny her scaling, and most games will just go long enough that you will get value out of a champion, which is why I recommend her as like my premier option. And Mordekaiser, which I'll talk about them when I get to the S tier. So the other A tier picks include the likes of Yorick, who still performs really well in mid to low elo. The nerfs he received back along it was genuine power loss, so he's not like an S tier option these days. But I think if you're comfortable playing Yorick, and even into Elite, like he can translate a lot better than he has done in previous iterations. I'd say he's a pretty genuine A tier option. Pantheon has been in a pretty solid spot for a while now. I have him in the A tier. You do need to snowball with this champion though, and I do think this is the weaker of his it's his second weakest of his four roles. I think support is... do I think support's the weakest? Yeah, I think support's probably the weakest. And then I'd say mid is the strongest for solo queue. Then jungle, then top, then support. I think... I mean, if you enjoy Pantheon, then yeah, I'd say he's a pretty good top lane option still, though. Like, he's good across the board. Aatrox, I'm in the A tier. Obviously, you're more leaning towards the kind of the AD bruiser variations, like your Overlord's Bloodmails, your Cindered Skies, your Styraxes, your Shojans, your Overlord's Bloodmails. These items can all be really nice on him. Spirits later on, Death Stance is a really nice item on him. But there have been lethality variations which pop up here and there. Like if you're playing into like a ranged matchup, you can build something like the Profane Hydra with the buff this patch. It is a lot cheaper, a lot more accessible, and like if you're playing like your Electrocute, it can be quite nice in that regard. Right, so the tanks. Shen, Cho'Gath, Mundo. I believe there's just like a lot of different... they're primarily these ones are primarily counter picks. I mean, I'd say Sion is the blind option of these four. Sion is the I need a stonewalling champion which will get me through laning phase and have value in most games I'm going to play. But that is where I'd recommend Sion. Cho'Gath, I think, is a good counter pick where you can freely kind of just like punish the laner. You can freely scale, get your ult stacks. Can be a really, really powerful option, especially if you're looking for a bit more AP in your team composition. Mundo, if you get a free lane, can scale into a monster. He is more AD Juggernaut, AD Bruiser shaped than the other ones here, so I think he does almost fulfill a different kind of purpose. But in those kind of situations where he's good, I think he's an incredible option. And then Shen, I'd say the criteria for Shen is getting a decent matchup, which you can kind of punish early, and they aren't just gonna end the game if you like ult in like a suboptimal situation. And then honestly, just paired alongside a hyper carry. If you have a hyper carry with this champion, it really like amplifies the value of the shield and like the tools you can provide as a champion. Okay, some of the other options here. Poppy probably should be more like a mid A tier option, mid to low A tier option. I think she's incredibly good, but she's definitely lost a genuine amount of early game power, and she's quite counter pick reliant, so probably sits as more like a low A tier option at the moment. Renekton, I have towards the high end of the A tier. I really like him as a pick. Good early game, good mid game. Honestly, decent late game these days. You have flexibility of build. I recommend Stridebreaker Renekton. I think Stridebreaker is a really, really good, just honestly default option on him because you carve really nicely into Sterix, and I mean, I don't like Eclipse that much of an item. I think it carves quite badly in a lot of builds and kind of relies on you snowballing quite aggressively to really get good value out of the item. You can still go it in certain spots where you really feel comfortable on it. But like, yeah, Stridebreaker Sterix is my recommended core. Jax, I also have towards the top of the A tier. Like these two picks, I really do recommend super highly. They can be just really good general options to have in your pool. They work quite nicely across most elo brackets, and yeah, I'd say they're deservingly top of the A tier. Warwick, I've dropped down from the S to the A tier. The nerf he received in the previous patch was meaningful. It wasn't huge. Like, Warwick was a low S tier option, but now I am going to drop him down to the A tier. He is very, very early game skewed and can definitely struggle in mid to low elo if not given like the kind of stable conditions he wants, or if you just respect his early game. So I think that kind of it gives him clear weaknesses, but if Warwick gets ahead, it can feel really, really punishing and hard to play against this champion. So I do think there is still decent merit to the pick, and he can be the likes of Ambessa really nicely if you have like good mastery of a champion and people are like picking Ambessa into you. Fiora, I still have her within the A tier. She probably sits towards the mid, low end of the A tier because she does have a genuine, I mean, like a obvious high barrier to entry. You need to understand how to like fast combo on this champion, understand how to kind of manipulate and use the vitals on the pick. And just understanding how you want to play out the game of a champion is all very, very meaningful. The S tier. So there are 6 champions at the moment, which is honestly like one of the least lowest amount I've had for a while. I still have Singed here. I still think he's a really, really good pick, but he's the niche option of the S tier. I wouldn't recommend playing him load unless you've got a lot of mastery on a champion. But if you have a lot of mastery, he's probably one of the best picks to be like an OTP of at the moment. Olaf, I have within the S tier. I just really like the fact that the champion in certain compositions is really, really powerful. Like as a like just an opt-in option, and then like pair him with an enchanter, and he can steamroll games. Like he's one of the best 1v9 top laners which you can have access to. Kayle, I think it's just so hard to punish at the moment. Her builds have been in such a good spot for a while now, and for this elo bracket where the games are almost always going to go long, she just fits so well. Definitely punish a lot more in higher brackets of play with like certain counter picks and certain kind of like team compositions, but you're not going to run into those anywhere near as like consistently within like mid to low elo, so she just like acts really nicely as one of the premier options. The AD Juggernaut option is set. The AP one is Mordekaiser. Obviously Mordekaiser's play rate is absurd at the moment. Ever since they did the AD buff to his Q, it's just given like it's allowed him to have some level of build creativity and flexibility. It's so funny to see that Hexplate has become the kind of like Mordekaiser AD option, which is like crazy to see just like how that item buffed on the same patch as like Mordekaiser buffs has kind of like promoted that. I don't think it's amazing, like, but people enjoy it, so that more than anything can be like really, really powerful, and they're just like perception is obviously a very meaningful thing. So I mean, I'm going to like leave him as an S tier option. My obvious recommend is still going to be Argot. Like I still play a huge amount of Argot. Like, I'm consistently one of the top Argot players on EU West, and I really heavily value this champion. It's so good in so many different compositions for mid elo, especially. Like, once you go higher up, he does definitely struggle a lot more because the lane is like a lot more meaningful, and Argot does have a lot of losing lanes, especially through like 2 to level 8 threshold. And if you play into a lot of enchanters, that can definitely be quite punishing. But I'd honestly say the main criteria for picking Argot is a lane which you're not just going to get shit stomped in. So usually that means just not picking him into like a ranged option. And then as long as you have, like, you're either playing into an engaged support, so they are forced to play into you, or you're playing with an engaged support, so you're not, like, the primary setup of the team, that is, like, the main criteria of the champion, and that's, like, all you really need to pick him at the moment, especially within this elo bracket of play. So those are my recommendations. I don't think there is a huge gap, honestly, between, like, the C and the S tier. I think it just comes down to mastery, so it's about finding what you enjoy as a champion, and yeah, there's a lot of flexibility at the moment. I have kind of opened up a lot of build alternatives, like options within the top lane, and that, yeah, does allow you to be quite creative with what you want to do. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.